Welcome to the Enlighten Up podcast, where I am going to take you into a deep exploration of what it means to exist in this current reality. We are going to raise your vibes, open your mind, expand your heart, and dive deep into the wondrous mysteries and possibilities of this lifetime. There's been a spiritual catalyst that has set in motion the awakening process of many across the globe to return to the knowingness of self and unite what has been separated. Together, we're going to bring light into that darkness. We're going to remember the joy of living. But most of all, we're going to turn up the volume of our own eternal power and do the thing we're here to do. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Enlighten Up podcast. Today's guest is Peter McLaughlin, and his path into his work that he's doing today started with a leukemia diagnosis that forced him to look beyond surface level healing. And that experience pulled him deep into understanding how subconscious patterns, trauma, and even past life imprints are shaping the way we live today. He's currently helping people break the patterns running underneath their lives using techniques like hypnosis and past life regression. And I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation today. So, Peter, welcome to the show. So glad to have you with us today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So, what you're describing here, just even in what I've understood from the very little introduction that we've had, is that a lot of our spiritual awakenings, many people, not all, but many people do start through some kind of healing crisis.
Yes, I would say so. I like calling mine a spiritual 2x4. You know, on the same day, I get two diagnoses. One is Lyme disease and the other one is leukemia. And they were largely asymptomatic. I mean, I in retrospect, I knew, after the fact, it was like, oh, that's where the sore knees are coming from. It's not because I'm now, in my early 40s, it's Lyme disease. But other than that, it wasn't like there was a series of symptoms that I connected back to what was going on underneath the surface. So for me, it really was. It felt like I got hit without any kind of warning. And I'm sure that so much of that was because I had ignored the more subtle signs that had undoubtedly been coming my way for a long time. And, I think stubborn people that aren't paying attention, this is probably what happens to us, is that there's a big hit. And I still feel like free will is at play. So for me, it was like a doorway. A doorway was presented to me, and for the first time, I actually opened the door and walked through it. And that led me to where I am now.
Well, what were some of the instances where maybe you weren't opening the doorway and walking through it, where you said you're ignoring signs? Like, what kind of signs were you ignoring before this came about?
Oh, gosh. I think anger was one of them. So my wife and I got married when I was 34. We had our first at 35, another one at 37, another one at 39. At the same time, we bought a 100-year-old Victorian house. At the same time, I was working 4 days a week as a consultant on Wall Street and 1 day a week building this security guard business. Oh, and on the weekends, mowing the lawn and fixing up this house that, you go in to do one thing and you find two more things behind the wall. And I had never been married before. I'd never had kids before. I didn't even have siblings. And so all of it was this like crushing weight. And I can remember having anger, like being really angry at the kids for little kid things that they did. I think that was a kind of a sign. I remember that when I would mow the lawn, I would have this really itchy band, or play golf, have this itchy band on my forehead where my baseball hat met. And I think that was a sign of, poisons and toxins coming out of my body. And I just completely, blissfully ignored all of that. I remember for the first time in my life having a kind of nervous breakdown, like where all of this weight felt like it was coming down on my shoulders. And this one day, my wife and I were like having contentious conversation or something. And I just I just went from anger to laughing. And I was almost like looking at myself going, what's going on with you? But still, it wasn't like, oh, I need to get to the bottom of this. It was only when this thing hit,
Wow.
that with the diagnoses. I mean, even my back went out, like all this stuff. And I think I just was programmed to just keep going, one foot in front of the other. Just keep going, keep going, keep going. You can handle it. Nothing's too hard for you. Just keep going. So I mean, I think I honestly feel like I needed it because I wasn't paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a lot that's kind of happening, crushing, like you said, crushing down on you.
Mhm.
And it's interesting that you said anger, because that one is usually related to things that are trying to get to the surface, right? But they can't. And so, like the itching or the scratching or any kind of skin irritation is definitely a sign of some suppressed anger. But what brought you to realizing you had this leukemia diagnosis? If it was asymptomatic and all that, how did that come to be?
So this was all in the wake of 9/11. And we lived an hour and a half north of New York City. I was working on Wall Street. So that was another thing you could add in. That the two of the planes, the ones that hit the North and South Tower, flew within a quarter mile of my house because they navigated using the Hudson River going from north to south to find the Trade Center. And we had moved from that old house in New York to a house in Connecticut. And when we moved there, my wife said, I know you've always wanted to be a volunteer firefighter. This seems like the right place, the right time to do that, because we're not going to have a fourth child. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. So I went to volunteer. And the first thing they want you to do is to take an extensive physical. Took the extensive physical. The doctor said, wow, you're in really good shape for a 41-year-old. Now we're going to just take some blood. The next day, the alarm bells go off, and that's where they come back with the Lyme disease and leukemia.
Oh, wow. So that's like a total shock. So here you are thinking
Yeah,
you're about to start an exciting passion that you've always wanted to do,
yeah,
and life puts up a massive hand in front of your face and says, not so fast.
yeah.
So what was that like then? Because I mean, you talk about how life was crushing down. That's got to be soul crushing in that moment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one that came up with those different stages that people deal with. I think deal with death. And the first one, I think, was what I felt, which was denial. I mean, this can't be true. There's no way. So go back to the doctor's office, have them take blood again, same results. And then there was anger, a lot of anger. I can remember hitting my steering wheel. In this one instance, I was watching this obese man eating an ice cream cone. I don't know anything about him. Maybe he's got leukemia too, but in my mind, I'm like, this isn't fair. And all this anger came up, and then fear came up, and sadness. And I felt like it took over my life, that for a couple of years, almost everything I would think about had to first go through the prism of this diagnosis.
Hmm.
And this sentence, if you will, the doctors said, when I asked how long do I have, they said, maybe 10 years. I mean, on the one hand, that was good. It wasn't like 18 months. But on the other hand, I had little kids. It's
Hmm.
like 41 at the time. So yeah, it was bewildering. It was frightening. There was anger. There was denial. I don't know if I did any bargaining. I wouldn't be surprised if I did.
We all try to bargain in those situations.
Right.
So, okay, so we're 2026 now. So we're 23 years later, and you're still
Yeah,
here with us today.
still
So,
here. Yeah.
what was your treatment plan like then?
Well, I went to a hematologist oncologist twice, which I like to say was one time too many, because on the first visit, she said, we don't know why this is caused, and we don't know how to cure it. And for some unknown reason, I think because I was in a fog, I went back for a second visit, which again, to me is just sort of illogical. And when I was in her office, I remember a couple things about visiting with her. One was I had done some research between visit one and visit two. And that research, I typed in, I was looking for how many cases of this kind of leukemia are diagnosed in the United States every year. And at the time, it was like, I want to say 3,500 cases in a country of 300 million people. And of those 3,500 cases, and I could have this wrong, it could be 45, that's my memory. Of those people, like 80% of them were over the age of like 57 or something, and I was 41 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying to the woman, to the doctor, do you know how many people are diagnosed with CLL every year? And she didn't. And I thought, that's not good. And I said, do you know how many of them are over the age of 57? She didn't know that either. And then I said, how many of those people, because I would inform her with the numbers, I then said, how many of those people in my age group would you imagine are simultaneously diagnosed with Lyme disease? And I could see her eyes just kind of get really wide. And I looked behind her over her shoulder and I could see pictures of little children. And I thought, I know what it's like to have little children at home and how much time I have. And I know what it's like for doctors, how they spend like 10 minutes with you. And I thought, she's not going to be able to figure this out. I'm going to have to do this, which I think was part of my programming. I got to do it by myself. And so the more I threw myself into trying to understand this, the more I was inexorably drawn from the purely physical cause and effect into the power the mind has over the body. Mm-hmm. Later, it was the power the spirit has over the mind and the body. But at this point, I'm like, wow, the mind is amazing. I'm going to have to figure out how to control my mind so I can control my body. And that's what ultimately led to wanting to be trained as a hypnotherapist.
Oh, wow. So where did you start with then that was kind of taking you away from those physical aspects? What were some of the main like highlighted points where you're like, holy shit, this is why this disease is coming on and presenting in my body?
Well, I didn't really know exactly why the disease was presenting in my body. I suspected that there was an element with the whole Lyme disease thing, like the confluence of these two things together was a red flag to me. After I left the hematologist oncologist, I found my way to a naturopath, and the naturopath immediately had me tested for heavy metals, and I was off the charts with heavy metal poisoning. Part of the reason for that could have been exposure to all of the fallout at ground zero with 9/11, because you had these two giant skyscrapers plus other smaller buildings that were completely pulverized, like turned into ash. Mm-hmm. And we were breathing that stuff for months. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing about the naturopath was their philosophy. So an allopathic philosophy, that's your basic MD, is the alleviation of symptoms. Whereas a naturopath is like, you probably have poison in your body and that's why you're sick, or you may not have the kind of building blocks, nutrients that you need to support your health. And over time, I took on the concept of emotional poisons, emotional toxins. And because the mind and body are connected, I thought, wow, that's probably a connection too. So those were key moments for me, kind of like aha moments, especially when the test for heavy metals came back off the charts. I was like, okay, that's got to be something. And then as I learned more about the mind and the autonomic nervous system and its interplay with all your body's major systems, like if you're in a chronic fight or flight response, it depresses your immune system and your reproductive system and your endocrine system and your digestive system. This is one of the reasons why people have trouble conceiving when they're trying so hard and then they give up and here comes the baby. Mm-hmm. Or people have digestive disorders that are related back to stress. Well, it's the same thing with your immune system and cancer. I'm not a doctor, so don't pay any attention to me. This is all just for educational, do your own research purposes. But those were big moments for me. And then when I went to get my training in New Mexico, part of this intensive training was choosing an instructor to be our hypnotherapist. And sitting in that chair half a dozen times for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours each time, man, the stuff that was coming out was blowing my mind. And when I came back from that experience, the anger was gone. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. And as I did detoxing with the naturopath, suddenly that itching on my forehead when I would mow the lawn or play golf or something, that was gone too. I was like, this is incredible.
So I myself found a naturopath early on in my healing journey, which was around the age of 20. So I completely understand what you're talking about. I, for one, was not exactly thrilled with doctor's approach of like, well, we can throw some medication here, or there's just no answer, so there's nothing you can do. Whatever it was, I just wasn't happy with those kinds of answers. So, like you, I was like, well, I got to figure this out on my own then, and really kind of searching, which interestingly enough, as I did find a naturopath, that's what really opened me up to a lot of the more spiritual components. So like meditation and visualizing light in my body and breath work and things of that nature really early on in my life. So for you, was the hypnotherapy kind of like your launch pad with that in the more spiritual realms?
It began before that. I really was probably like you, Nicole, really searching. I can't remember the exact amount of time, but I know that I was trained in 2006 and I was diagnosed in '03. So it was a little more than 3 years where I actually became a firefighter. I became an EMT. I was trained in the basics of the body and rendering first aid at a scene. I was going into burning buildings and helping people in car accidents. And for me, this was, there was a, there was an empowering part of this because I think diagnoses in our Western allopathic system is inherently disempowering. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, it is kind of victim related. Even calling people patients to me I just recoil against that word because to me it implies, yeah, you sit in that waiting room and read that old copy of People magazine, and when the doctor gets around to it, he's going to come out here, and if he can't fix you, nobody can. That's how I've interpreted the whole thing, which just I find it a kind of an abomination. And so the firefighting, I think, distracted me a little bit. I learned a lot of stuff. I learned more about how to face fear because you have to do that. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it or how much training you get. It's scary when there's a building that's on fire and you're going inside. And the scariest part to me was you can't see anything. Everything is black. Mm-hmm. Like you can't see your watch. You couldn't read your watch, even if you had it right up to your face. And, sometimes crazy things happen in those environments. And there's a lot of fear that's involved with it. And you learn through the training and through the camaraderie and that you're never alone and that you're helping each other and then just doing it, how to face it. And so that helped me immensely was that part of it. And the spiritual stuff, it began to arise with my exploration. So I remember doing a Panchakarma weekend. So this is an Ayurvedic medicine thing. And I was gone for the weekend. There was a doctor, Ayurvedic doctor, also he's an MD, and he was talking to us about our doshas, which is like what you're born with. It's kind of like your way of approaching the world. Like, are you fiery or are you wind or are you, slower? And sometimes these things are mixed together. He talked to us about diet. He talked to us about meditation. So he had us doing meditation. There was this one thing during the weekend where two people massage you at the same time. And while they're massaging you, there's like a drip of oil that's going on between your eyes. And for me, it caused different kinds of visions, different kinds of, because it gets you out of your head, really. Mm-hmm. That started to awaken things. I did a Tai Chi weekend at a retreat in Massachusetts, and that was the same thing. I was so immersed in this body work, if you will, that during, and I was doing a lot of meditation, and during a lecture, I felt like I was able to see things that I normally couldn't see. So by the time I got out to New Mexico, the spiritual pump was primed, if you will.
Okay.
And that just really exploded it.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're kind of get reaching this particular point and you're starting to have your life completely change before your eyes, right? Like your identity, everything is changing, it sounds like. What would you say was one of the bigger lessons that is applicable to people who, like, on a wider scale of when they're approaching like fear? Let's talk about fear specifically, because I think that's one of the most debilitating like states of being that people can find themselves in for one moving forward. And it's interesting that you've got a lot of like this Aries energy coming up in just in your whole story of,
That's my sign.
oh, okay. Well, there you go. Because Aries is the sign of, well, it starts things, but it's also emergency, because like that's definitely like anyone who's got Aries energy could be like primed for like that paramedic EMT fire. Fire is another it's a fire sign, but specifically Aries, is truly about fires. And anger is in the Aries energy. So it's almost like when I listen to you speak about your story, you had all of this anger coming up, but then also choosing to be a firefighter was allowing you to almost take the anger within you and channel it into putting out other fires, like to help others. So I don't know if that's something that you recognized within yourself. But when it comes to that idea of fear and being able to take action despite the debilitation that it brings on, what would you say was the biggest lesson you learned to keep moving forward?
There's several. One of them was back to the immediate wake of 9/11. I remember listening to a terrorism expert, and this expert was giving advice for people who were in a state of fear all across the country, but most particularly in New York and most particularly in lower Manhattan where it happened. Because it really was a war zone. I've never been in one before, but it was. There were more police, fire, emergency workers, and military down there in the couple of weeks following it than just regular people like I was at the time. And this expert was saying that you can help to dispel the fear by learning as much as you possibly can about your adversary. Because I think for a lot of us, one of our first reactions to something that frightens us is to run away from it. And I've done that like with bills. I've let them pile up. There have been times in my life where I sort of ran away from that. And for me, that was like, okay, I'm going to have to look at this word cancer that we all have fear. We've all been taught to be afraid of that word. I'm going to look at that and specifically what I've been diagnosed with right in the face. Like that was my idea. I was going to get right in its face and try to understand it as best I could. And then he talked about preparing yourself, building yourself up in some way, making yourself stronger, whatever. And then he talked about taking action. And those three steps were always in my mind regarding the fear. And this is precisely what we do in the fire service. Like we learn everything that we can possibly learn about fire. We learn like how it works, like the chemistry of it, basically. It's called the fire tetrahedron. And if you pull one of those pieces out, the fire goes away. So we learn as much as we can about fire. We learn as much as we can about our equipment. We learn as much as we can about car accidents and about ice rescues and about all, driving safely when you're navigating to an emergency scene. And then we practice, we train. We set cars on fire and put them out. We practice cutting people out of cars. Sometimes an old building is donated to us and we practice forcible entry into the building, rappelling down from the second floor, breaking out windows, setting part of it on fire, putting the fire out, doing it again. All of these things so that when it happens, we already kind of we're prepared. We're not just physically or intellectually prepared. I think we're also more emotionally prepared for what's about to happen. And I believe that these skills can be translated to people like me who are diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. There's a way to do that, and that's something that I stepped into, and it's something that the fire service did for me, I think. Plus it took me out of my own head, out of my own story for periods of time, where I was helping somebody else in the midst of their crisis, of their emergency. And I think that probably helped as well. And recently I've learned how you're telling your autonomic nervous system, that just means automatic. That's what runs your body. And it only has two modes. It has fight or flight, it has rest and digest. That's it. There's no third mode to the autonomic nervous system. And when firefighters, after a serious incident, let's say it's a big structure fire, what we do is we clean everything. Like, you're exhausted, but you come back to the firehouse and you unravel all the hose and you wash it because it's now covered in soot, dirt, maybe even shards of glass, and you've got to clean this all off, and then you have to dry it, and then you have to roll it back up, repack it onto the apparatus. You have to clean all of your tools because they're covered in junk. And the ostensible reason for this, of course, is that if there's another incident, everything has to be ready to go. Mm-hmm. What I've learned recently is just the process of going through something that's routine, like making your bed, like doing your dishes, like doing the vacuuming, or in our case, cleaning up after a scene and putting everything where it goes back on the truck, tells your subconscious mind, everything now is safe. Everything is normal. It helps us to go into that rest and digest place and not stay in this constant on that oftentimes occurs after a trauma.
Well, yes, absolutely. But also sneakily, that constant on is there in the background when you're delaying or procrastinating stuff, which is where a lot of people find themselves. Like, literally put out an email today to my email list about this, in how a lot of people think that if they just hesitate or they're delaying something, like they're just pressing pause. But it's like, no, you're hardwiring your body and brain to choose and prioritize feeling comfortable immediately versus actually growing and expanding into something new and bigger for yourself, right? And so when you're in that on state, it's actually like this place of delayed, it's sorry, not delayed. It's like this immediate gratification of like, well, this is just comfortable right now, even though the consequence is much bigger and it's going to compound the problem later.
Yeah, that's a very important insight. And I think we all know, because it's human to avoid pain and seek pleasure. That's how we're wired, in that order. And it takes another part of us to step up and do something we don't want to do. And I'm sure everybody that's listening can probably relate to finally sitting down with the bills and just doing the best you can with them, and doing a spring cleaning of your house and how it feels when it's done. I don't know about you, but I've always felt like this sense of lightness, seeing all of this crap out by the street that was in my house that I don't need anymore. Mm-hmm. That when we take action, there are all these rewards, but to your point, they're delayed rewards. It's like investing, not spending the money today, but rather investing it so that you have more tomorrow.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing, is like you're choosing immediate comfort versus the long-term gratification that is much more long-lasting and will provide much more to you when you arrive there. And so it's just like, it's such a funny cycle to find yourself in, because it's that fear that's triggering you into a state that's really thinking you're taking a little comfort from it by delaying or procrastinating something, but it's only compounding it, making it worse in the end. So, and that's something that, one of the things that I've been kind of, how I've shifted and been shifting my life lately in the last 6 months or so, after going through like a massive ego death. Thought I had been through enough of them, but currently was not. And I realized that every time I had tried to set goals for myself, I would just keep pushing them off or delaying them, right? Or not real, or I would do them for a little bit and then like I would lose interest, right? It wasn't like there wasn't a strong enough payoff to keep that going. And I realized the way I was able to overcome that was like, I just got to be someone different. I've got to choose an identity that these actions are natural to me. Because there's so much science now behind this idea that your identity, your brain chooses actions based on who it believes you are, not on what you want to do, because you need motivation constantly to do what you want to do. But if you're already that person and your brain is being wired to believe it, then the actions just naturally start organically happening, which lowers the effort, which lowers the resistance to doing it when you don't want to do it because you feel like you're someone different.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with you. And there's a fair amount in hypnosis and hypnotherapy around identity change. That's a known concept. It's something that I've included on some of the tracks that I have on my YouTube channel, for example. And we were talking before we pressed record about, you were asking me, is there something, in your life recently that you're interested in? And I said, yeah, I went back to acting based on this bizarre incident that occurred.
Oh, so sorry,
And
you cut out there for a second. I know no one's going to hear it. So can you just say that again, that
yeah,
you
yeah,
got
starting
into
from what?
acting?
Okay. So I went back to acting after 22 years away from it. It wasn't my intention, but there was an armed robbery that created this need for an actor. Actor was gone. They had been arrested. And I was one of the producers of this show, and there was no time left to get somebody else. I had to do this.
Wait.
And
So just so I understand here,
yeah.
you were a producer on a show, and one of the actors was arrested because they were in an armed robbery that had nothing to do with the set or the
Yes,
movie. Okay, this is like a real armed robbery.
two.
Oh, two. Okay.
Two armed robberies. And they had it on the local news, like the security camera footage of this guy walking in with a gun. It's just nuts. Absolutely pure insanity. Like
Okay.
you should have seen the look on my face when I got this news. So anyway, actors are all about stepping into different identities. It's what we do. And Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage. All the men and women are merely players. Each one has their exit and their entrance. He called his theater the globe. And we're all actors anyway. You and I are playing roles right now that were basically constructed for us when we were children. That's what Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, called the persona. The word personality, like people say, well, I can't do that. That's just the way I am, or that's my personality. They're talking about a concept, a word that literally comes from Greek theater 3,000 years ago. That's the mask. That's the personality. That's the person. That's the persona. That's the person. And a persona or personality just means that's the construction you came up with to survive in your family of origin. It might be, if you were the one that was really happy all the time, that's what really worked. Or you were the studious one, or the one that could be counted on. Who knows what it was? But these are all these characteristics, and the personality that would represent them is really like a character that an actor would play in theater. And so you saying, I had to come up with a different identity is totally normal to my way of thinking. Like I completely get that.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to me that anyone that wants change would benefit from stepping into the identity of someone who would no longer smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
Someone who would step into the identity of a fit, trim person rather than an obese person. From a family of obese people. Because that's surely part of an identity at some point. So
Yeah.
I completely resonate with what you're saying there.
Well, even Joe Dispenza says that if you want to change your personal reality, you need to change your personality, right? Like,
Yes.
so, um, And that really, like you said, it's just your identity. It's like who you are, what you're showing up with. And like that's the great thing about, like you were saying, like the world is kind of a stage and we're all just kind of actors here in our avatars. And we can completely change the personality of who we are and what we want to become. And that will certainly change the reality rather quickly, especially if you're like one of the things like I try to always get myself into, well, not always, but when I really want to push the envelope a little bit more, is like, well, like, okay, can I method act this identity like into existence? Like, who is she? And just like kind of like completely being so delulu about like what is actually in front of me, and just going into this whole other like reality. It's almost like it's really like, I'm not saying that delusion is always a good thing, but in this case, it sometimes benefits you to be so delusional to your current reality so that you can become someone completely new.
Oh, I love that concept. I really do. I love that concept. And I've thought about it in the past, even before I became a hypnotherapist, in terms of I had this one friend, he was also an actor. And I remember saying about him that he didn't know what wasn't possible, so he would go do it, and sometimes it would work. Where a different person would say, "Oh, that's not possible for me,"
Hmm.
and so they'd shut themselves down and never swing the bat and never hit the ball.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably true for a lot of us.
Hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because you hear the term gaslighting, and obviously you're gonna think, ooh, like no one wants to be gaslit. But in this case, sometimes you almost have to gaslight yourself into a completely
Sure,
new identity, when you're really wanting like rapid change. Like you're really like,
absolutely.
yeah, whatever this is, I'm done with it. So I just have to completely gaslight myself into a completely new identity and reality. Um, of course, do not defer any specific responsibilities that are absolutely necessary for you to take care of, but you understand what I mean. Like it's
I
like
do.
there's
It's a
certain
kind of
things.
fake it until you make it
Yeah, it's a
concept.
fake it till you kind of make it on a whole nother level, you
Right.
know.
And I'm reminded of learning that, and this is probably 20-year-old information, but there at the time there were more, and there may still be more male dentists. The most common name for a male dentist in the United States is Dennis. That's the
Oh,
most common name
really?
for a male dentist is Dennis. More common than any other name. And that turned up in other areas too. And the idea is that the subconscious mind hears that word, which sounds a lot like dentists, and it takes it on, in some cases, more so than with other names, as the identity of this person.
Oh, that's interesting.
And you think about Native Americans, how they would have like, running bull or swims fast or runs fast or whatever it is, that
Mhm.
that could become part of your identity if it's a name that you take on ceremonially, that people call you this all the time. So I'm thinking out loud with you that one of the ways of changing your identity would be, of course, to use visualization and to use sound because not everyone is primarily visual.
Mhm.
But maybe you come up with some other name for yourself, and you don't have to tell other people it. You just think of yourself with this name.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know if you've come across this before, but I certainly have that we all have a spirit name, and you can learn what it is.
yeah.
And that spirit name has a meaning.
Mhm. So what's your
And the
spirit
meaning is
name?
probably related to your role in this life.
What's your spirit name?
It's Aertes, Aertes, and it means the opening through which the light shines.
Oh, well, that's very much what you're doing right now.
I like to think so. I hope
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Well, the identity I think is important, like you said, to definitely give it a name. I've given my identity like a name. Like I've gone through a couple of different ones, always upgrading, and then giving it a new name. And I think that's important, like you said, because the brain you will identify based off of a name, right? Because it is our first form of identity when we come into this world.
Yeah.
So just to kind of shift, you also, through your hypnosis, I'm assuming you've done a lot of past life regression,
Yes, a lot.
and you're currently writing a book about that.
Yes.
And so, what was your first encounter with past life regression? Was it something that you went through personally yourself, or was it
It
something
was.
that, okay. So, what was that like
It
for
was
you?
it was a spontaneous past life regression. So I was going through the training in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it wasn't part of the curriculum. It wasn't part of the actual class. They did past life regression there, but it was sort of an add-on to the main curriculum. And I was interested in the main curriculum, and then I added on a big chunk of medical application. But I was over at a fellow student's house one night, and there were two other guys there, and he was using a crystal bowl, like making that humming sound with the crystal bowl.
Hmm.
And the idea is that your brain entrains to that frequency, and that helps you go into a trance. And we were practicing with sending energy around in a circle, and I could feel it. I could feel that energy going around and around and around. And during this process, I just had these spontaneous experiences. One was with the Virgin Mary, like she just came right into my face, and I was able to speak to her. And then I had a spontaneous past life regression to Egypt. And I was first person, I was in my former body. And I looked down at my arms, and they were thinner than they are now and much, much darker skin. And I had on this very white cotton robe of some kind. And I remember being so struck by how white it was. It was like almost brilliant white. It was nighttime, there were torches. And then the scene changed, and we were inside one of the pyramids, walking along what seemed like a ramp that was going along inside, again, torches inside. And then it almost just as immediately shifted to another past lifetime where I was being held aloft by monks. And it looked like, I don't know, 1600s or something in England, in the British Isles. And I was looking through a stained glass window, and I could see a carriage going across a moor at night. And then the next scene, it changed again, and I was actually in the carriage, and I could look down and see the leather and the cracks in the leather and everything. It was wild. And I didn't purposely seek to have those experiences. They just boom, boom, boom. They just came when I was in that state.
Oh, wow. So, how did that shift things for you then in your actual reality, this life?
Well, I think that was certainly a key step on many steps. And I think that the shift for me, which continues to shift, is we are eternal beings. We are spirits temporarily housed in the vehicle of the body. The way you and I and the listeners get into a car. You know, the car is like the body, and we are the soul or the spirit that's driving it. And we can get out of that car and sell it and buy another car, even if it looks completely different. And everything happens, in my opinion, for a reason. The leukemia diagnosis, other things that have happened in my life, everything is happening for a very important reason. And I believe that it's always happening for our higher interests, always, even if it looks really grim.
Yeah.
That's what I believe, and that's what's been informed by all of these things that have happened. And for me, it takes a lot of the stress out of living. That it takes a lot of the reasons for getting really angry out of anger.
Yeah.
You know, that when something bad happens, I'm not always perfect at this, but I want to ask myself, why? Why am I having this experience right now? Why am I experiencing all of this pain? What is it trying to tell me? And I find that interesting because I think as humans, we're wired to ask that question. Like when something horrible happens, people will say, why? But they haven't been taught that there's a way to get an answer to that question.
Yeah. The idea of going back into past lives, I think, can be really helpful for providing certain context to perhaps lessons that keep reoccurring, that you're maybe there's one that you're trying to really kind of close that circuit on in this particular lifetime. Is there anything that dramatically shifted anything for you in this lifetime that you saw from the past?
Yes. Yeah, my maybe 5, 6 years ago, my wife and I were having a lot of trouble, and we were doing marriage counseling. And after one of the sessions, we were just standing in my office, and I just had this overwhelming feeling that I had. It was like something coming up inside of me, like if you were sick or drinking too much, and something's coming up. That it didn't feel bad, but it felt like something was arising. And I just said to her, I don't know why this is happening right now, but something powerful is coming up for me. And she was awesome. She said, okay, just do whatever you need to do. I'll be right here. So we sat in the chair that I use for my clients. I closed my eyes and I went back into a past lifetime, and I was on a battlefield in medieval times with swords and spears and shields. And I hear things much better than I see them. Sometimes I see them very vividly, like in the case of that regression to the man in Egypt. This was one of those cases where I saw and heard it. And it was summertime. The grass was super green. I could hear the yelling. I could hear the sound of metal hitting metal, metal hitting wood. And I could feel myself putting everything I had into this. Like I wasn't holding back. I was giving it everything I had. And then the next scene was me with a spear in my chest at sort of half rolling and sliding to the bottom of a hill and lying there and looking up at the sky and realizing that's it. And then the next scene was standing in front of a woman, very short, and 3 or 4 children, and they all were wearing these like nightgowns. And the house was more like a hut. And as soon as I saw them, 2 things. One was consciously, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't recognize them or anything. But my body reacted violently. Like I started sobbing, sitting in this chair, racking sobs that went on for 3, 4, 5 minutes. And I can cry, but I don't cry a lot.
Yeah.
And consciously, I didn't know why it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it subsided to weeping, I said to them in my mind, I found myself saying, not even on purpose, but I just said, I'm sorry. And they said, what were you supposed to do? You died. And I remember having this moment of, they're right. They're right. It was like this short circuit in the brain or something like, yeah, what? Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know what the exact story was, but I'm pretty sure that I was trying to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't able to.
Yeah.
And I took on a
Guilt.
sense of outsized responsibility
Yeah.
for the welfare of other people, which creates a kind of controlling aspect. Because if you're wrong, it's not just you, it's other people. And after that session, I could feel all of that just calm way down. I felt much calmer, particularly about relationships.
That is an interesting story of, like you said, a very interesting word there, control. On when you're taking on the responsibility of many others and their well-being, how it's a way for us to assert control over people without us really realizing that's what we're doing. Like of course, the intention is good, but the road to hell is paved with a lot of good intentions, right? So, can you speak a little bit more to that idea of control and how it's showing up, just so that people can understand more of why it's important to not necessarily feel the need to carry so much for everyone else? Because this is something that a lot of people do in when they're going deeper into their own spirituality or religion, or they're coming from a place of wanting to care for others, heal others, that kind of sense.
Yeah, I can, and in a couple of different ways. One was something that I learned in my training, and that was that, and I really identified with this as a first responder. And the guy who started the school was a former paramedic. And he talked about if you get your identity from being a rescuer, which is similar to maybe some of these other words, then you have to have a victim.
Mm-hmm.
You need a victim in order to feel good about yourself, because if you don't have a victim, there's nobody to rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take this even further, in order to have a victim, you often need to have a perpetrator. So you're playing into a really kind of nasty cycle there. And I remember when we were taught this, like going, oh my God, it really, really hit me hard, like a big way. And then there was something else too about sympathy and empathy that, and this ties into the fire service. So if you get to a scene, and I've done this, and there's been a car accident, and there are people who there are dead, and there's other people there who are related to them, and they're screaming, which is totally understandable. Well, if you're empathizing with them, the definition of that is you're going to enter their emotional world. At that point, you're useless trying to stabilize the situation and help this emergency. And so I believe there's a kind of, you don't want to be cold, but there's a healthy distance, both from getting your identity from what you're doing, or getting somehow rewarded from what you're doing, and not being a robot and being able to function. I don't know that I can describe it any better than that, because there has to be a human connection there.
Yeah.
In all of these circumstances, I think, but it can't be that you get in the sinking boat with them.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's someone's natural like instinct, if they're super empathic, is to
Exactly.
jump right in and be there with them. Whereas, well, now who's going to steer the boat? Who's going to get them out of the boat? It's sinking. So, it's just like you adding more emotional weight into the situation energetically.
That's true. And the fire service, they drill it into you over and over again. At a scene, your first responsibility is to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you get electrocuted because you didn't see a down power line, you've made the problem worse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You've taken away one rescuer, one helper, and you've added one more victim.
Yeah.
So your first responsibility is to yourself. Your second responsibility is to your fellow firefighters. Because if you see somebody about to step on a downed line, you grab them and keep them safe, keep them off that.
Yeah.
For the same reason, your third responsibility is to bystanders. You don't want somebody else wandering into the scene and getting hurt. Your fourth responsibility is to the victim. And that was a real kind of wake up call for me.
Yeah.
It's not like the movies, you go running in, into something, and maybe, in the movies, you never make it worse, but in real life, you can make it worse.
Yeah.
And so even working with people in this setting, it's that dance between, as a human, recognizing what they're going through,
Mm-hmm.
and having a kind of sympathy, but not getting down in the hole with them, to mix metaphors.
Yeah.
Put the ladder down there so they can climb up, rather than jumping in the hole with them, and now there's two people in the hole.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that you said there is something that I've had this conversation with several different clients who find themselves in this common. A lot of us do. I know I have at certain points found myself guilty of doing this myself. It's just one of those pathways that, we go down, but we also have to really understand, oh, if I'm trying to always save someone, right? Even at my last retreat, one of the ladies there, who had this most incredible journey after we really kind of pointed out, I showed her, like, you're always taking care of your family, your kids, whatever, and they're grown, they're adults, Okay. But always thinking, well, they won't be able to do it if I don't do it for them, if I don't like, hear whatever. And what she really started to see is like, wow, when I do that, I'm making them believe they are not capable, that they're
Yes.
victims, and that I feel better because I get to be the savior, but also she gets burnt out and all these kinds of things, right? And so it's this vicious cycle, of making people believe like, well, you're a victim and I'm going to help you, and not realizing that's what we're doing when we enter that process. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
It is crazy. And the whole medical paradigm, as I was ranting about before, is similar, including a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
A diagnosis is a suggestion, a hypnotic suggestion given by a person in authority to a person in a heightened state of emotion.
Yeah.
And, everybody kind of understands that people will often die right at 6 months if that's what they were given.
Mm-hmm.
We would call it a nocebo rather than a placebo. Placebo
Yeah.
is I will please, and a nocebo is the opposite of that. But it's a suggestion for an outcome.
Yeah.
And our whole medical system is oblivious to this as a concept, along with the patient thing that I was talking about before, where you just sit there. If you can be helped, these professionals will help you. And if you can't be helped, we'll give you here's how long you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But not hey, we're working together on this.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we're collectively going to figure this out together, or, or like putting someone in a place of empowerment to like
Yes,
be there to support them in the discovery of their solution and bringing it all together. Right. So, because I think
precisely.
that's ultimately where we all want to be, is feeling empowered and knowing, hey, we can do it. Right.
Yep.
So, well, this has been most fascinating conversation, Peter. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Could you please let my audience know? I know you've got a pretty big YouTube channel where they can find you, and also what else you've got going on and when your books are coming out.
Sure. YouTube channel is Blue Sky Hypnosis, and that's my website as well, blueskyhypnosis.com. The book, I'm not really sure. I've got 25,000 words written, and I'm so kind of swamped with other things. I'm not really sure when that's going to come out. I would like to be able to say to you, have an exact date, but I do not have one at this point. And so if people are interested in getting in contact with me, it would be blueskyhypnosis.com. And if you want to check out the work, I would go to the YouTube channel, also called Blue Sky Hypnosis.
Perfect. Well, I'll leave all of your information in the show notes so people can easily find you. And don't
Thank you.
forget, everyone, because when this podcast comes out, you will have about 24 hours from now of listening to jump into my Becoming the Medicine starting on March 25th. This is where it's an 8-week program where I teach you how to enter into that state of expansion that is commonly found through psychedelic journeys, but we're not going to use any psychedelics. I'm going to teach you how to train your body to actually feel safe in a state of expansion, because I'm telling you, wherever you currently are, your identity is wired to whatever is comfortable for you. So we've got to get the body rewired, and we're going to put that new identity in, and we're going to get you to a place where quantum leaping and becoming someone who actually lives your dreams, doesn't just think about them and hope for them to happen, starts becoming. So if you'd like to join me, we start March 25th. I will leave a link in the description below. Peter, thanks again for being on the show here. And guys, I love you. I will be back again with you next week. Thanks again for joining me for another show on the Enlighten Up podcast. I love you guys so much for all of your continued support. So remember to raise your vibe, find your tribe, and be open to the infinite possibilities held in the mysteries that surround us all. Thanks again for sharing the show with your family and friends. And if you're new to the show and you need to find out more information about me, please head on over to my website, NicoleFrolick.com, where you can join my newsletter. And please follow me on Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube. Keep your light bright, and I'll see you next week.